I want to welcome everyone. My name is Dan Rothblatt. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Jewish Community Foundation. I'm really excited that we're doing this program despite all the monumental news happening every day. The foundation is steadfast in its focus and its work. And putting on programs like this is one way that we hope to provide insights and knowledge to our wonderful circle of clients and friends in order to facilitate meaningful philanthropy. It's worth noting that collectively, the Jewish Community Foundation and all of its clients granted $180 million last year, which was a record amount. The impact that we have together is remarkable, and we thank you and we salute you. We often hear about the sometimes strained conversations between generations and are delighted to have Lee Hausner, a recognized leader in her field, with us today. Lee, thank you so much. We also want to thank the Sonnenbergs, who were originally slated to host this event. And Sonnenbergs will be back. Don't worry, we'll be calling you. I also want to thank Kate Martin, who has helped kind of in the background coordinate all the many details, and also my colleague Naomi, who will speak in just a moment. There's a few housekeeping items before we get started. I want to remind you that we are recording this session, and we will make it available for those who were unable to join us tonight, or if you would like to have a copy, please let us know. If you would like closed captioning, please press the button that says CC at the bottom of your webinar screen. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A box. There is no chat function in this webinar, but feel free to type your questions as the webinar is going, and we will get them to our speaker Lee after she finishes her remarks. And now I'd like to introduce Naomi Strongen, my wonderful colleague and the Vice President of our Center for Designed Philanthropy, to say a few words. Naomi?
Thank you so much, Dan. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Zoom tonight. My name is Naomi Strongen. I'm the Vice President of the Foundation's Center for Designed Philanthropy, our grant-making and philanthropic advising arm. In an article published just last month in the Jewish Journal, I shared that each one of us has the individual capacity to make a difference, turn tragedy into action, and in the process meet the urgent needs of the moment. This sentiment isn't something I can take full credit for. It's a principle deeply rooted in Jewish text and tradition, in the reminders from Pirkei Avot, that it is not on us to complete the work, nor are we free to desist from it. That if not us, who? And if not now, when? This belief in our collective ability to make a difference, in the necessity of acting now, even knowing that we will need the next generation to do the same, that's why we at the Foundation do what we do. That's the driving force fueling the Jewish Community Foundation's determination to bring this community's resources together in pursuit of a better, stronger, safer future for us, our children, and our grandchildren. Ever since I started working at the Foundation, and even more so since the horrific terror of October 7th, I have seen these ideals come to life through the power, passion, and focus of our donor community. My colleagues and I have helped donors direct contributions where they can do the most good and sustain the greatest impact by addressing emergency needs in Israel, maintaining support for our local community and beloved nonprofits, and countering the frightening spike in anti-Semitism. As Dan mentioned earlier, We collectively awarded over $180 million in 2023, including more than $10 million to Israel since October 7th. Last month, together with the Jewish Federation, the foundation awarded $1.3 million to support security needs at 55 Jewish institutions across Los Angeles. And this month, the foundation will be awarding millions more to support our local Jewish community, as well as pressing needs in Israel, touching hundreds of nonprofits locally and abroad. But our work does not and cannot end with our own grant making. To meet the needs of this moment and every moment, all of us at the foundation are ready to help you make a difference in the world. That's why anyone who has a fund at the foundation receives the benefit of philanthropic advising support from our team. We can help you come up with a meaningful giving strategy, provide ideas for excellent organizations that meet your area of interest, or vet a particular organization on your behalf. As you'll hear more about this evening, we can help guide you on passing down your legacy to the next generation, facilitating conversations with children and grandchildren around how your legacy will live on into the future. This is a benefit of having a fund at the Jewish Community Foundation. We are here to support you with your giving needs, taking action, and making an imprint on the community. It is now my sincere pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who has made it her life's work to help families pass down a legacy of philanthropy, midor lidor, from generation to generation. Dr. Lee Hausner is an internationally recognized clinical psychologist and business consultant, and an expert on psychological issues involving wealth and wealth transfer. She served as a senior managing director of First Foundation Advisors. Dr. Hausner presents at world-renowned conferences, is a frequent speaker at YPO groups, has been published in many publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Times, and Forbes, and has authored many books. Dr. Hausner is a former foundation trustee and a true friend of the foundation. I am delighted to turn the floor over to Dr. Hausner.
Thank you, Naomi. That was beautiful, and it was really my privilege to serve as a trustee for the foundation. And everything that you have said is really exactly what the foundation does. What I really wanted to do tonight, in the beginning, I want to give you a different little perspective of why I feel philanthropy is very important. I am very concerned with the business of the family. And I am very concerned with families being successful multi-generationally. As a matter of fact, the last book that I wrote was a book called The Legacy Family, a guide to creating a successful multi-generation family. So I'm on a 100-year arc where I would like to see for 5 generations, we maintain this success. And philanthropy has actually been a cornerstone of the strategic tools that I use to really help families create this. So I'd like to I kind of like to give you an overview of why philanthropy is important in terms of this whole legacy. And then we will ask more specific questions that you may have about how you can enhance the philanthropy that you are actually doing in your own families. Can we get the slide? Kate, can we get the...
Yep, just pulling it up now.
Okay. I don't see it on my screen.
Coming.
Okay, it's coming. Okay. This is my visual. In union, there is strength. And I think when you see a family that stays together, a multi-generation family staying together, it is extraordinarily exciting. So this is a very important visual in terms of what I'm trying to talk about as in creating legacy families. Now this, of course, is a dysfunctional family. This is not what we want to create. You know what? We skipped a slide. Just a second. Let me go back here. This is what everybody wants, right? Everybody in this audience, this is exactly what we all dream of having. Unfortunately, very often we are ending up like this. This is not what I am trying to create. And so in order to create that first image, I want you to understand that I am concerned with legacy families that are going to remain productive and contributive 4 to 5 generations past the original wealth creator and maintain close interpersonal relationships with the immediate and the extended family. That's my long-term goal for families. And philanthropy plays a critical strategic role in this. Now, legacy families understand there's 2 kinds of businesses. There's the business of the business, but there's the business of the family. I consider the family its own unique business. And I try to apply the same kind of principles when I'm working with families to create success as you would apply to a business. For example, let's just talk about a family meeting. You wouldn't conceive of having a business without family meetings. So I can't conceive that you will be able to maintain this legacy family if in fact you are not scheduling actual meetings of families. And this again is where philanthropy becomes so important, because very often philanthropy is the reason that these multi-generation families come together. They may have a foundation, or they may have a donor advised fund, the Jewish Community Foundation, where they come together, or prior to even going to the Jewish Community Foundation, they may sit together as a family to decide what it is that they want to do. But it is the philanthropy that is building a very important agenda when we are having these family meetings. And we're really working on what I call the business of the family. Now, legacy families, if anybody ever heard me talk, they will realize that this is probably critical to the way I look at families. Families have 4 very important capital accounts. As a matter of fact, the wealth of a family is not how much the dollar value is. The wealth of the family is a sum of the human capital of the family, the intellectual capital of the family, the social capital of the family, and the financial capital. All 4 are equally important, and there is not one great, successful legacy family that I have ever worked with or heard about that doesn't have a very strong social capital component. Now, you may be saying, well, what are all these capitals? There's a drop-down menu. So if we're talking about what is human capital, we're talking about how you parent and grandparent. We're talking about communication. We're talking about values and morals and ethics. We're talking about collaborative decision-making and conflict resolution skills and leadership training and team building, and everything that you do in regards to building those skills is making strong deposits in human capital. Now, really, just let's look at what philanthropy does. Philanthropy is my strategic strategy. When we're talking about values, morals, and ethics, what better way is there to communicate to families what the values and morals and ethics of the family is than how the family is involved philanthropically and talking about it? The idea of collaborative decision-making, which is a real difficult and challenging problem in many families, because if you think of families that have created wealth and you think about the initial wealth creator, male or female, you're usually talking about a pretty powerful, self-directed individual. You know, wealth creators are hardly shy, retiring individuals, unless you're some sort of scientist and you've developed a unusual kind of product. So what happens in families, you have this strong, kind of my way or the highway decision maker. And now we turn to the next generation and say, here are all the resources, share and collaborate. And they haven't a clue what that looks like, because they never really saw that model, unless the family can even come together around philanthropy and talk about how we collaboratively make decisions. And if I was working with a family in terms of their philanthropy, one of the rules that I always say is, you've got to make one grant that requires the collaboration of the family. And then there will be other grants that individuals are able to make because those are their personal passions. But this model of using philanthropies to help people collaborate is very, very critical. It also helps with conflict resolution. The idea that what happens if somebody in the family wants to give to an organization that is an anathema to the rest of the family? Here we've got a very good opportunity to talk about. Here we've got some conflict. What do we do about conflict resolution? And it is around philanthropy that this has occurred. I had one time worked with a family that made a fortune in an area that is not environmentally friendly, let's say. And naturally, one of the branches of that family were tree huggers. And there used to be really difficult conversations because the tree hugging family wanted to give to organizations that wanted to stop the work of the family that was a source of the capital. But we kind of used this thing to talk about how we deal with conflict. Okay. Next, this is intellectual capital. It's got everything to do with education and career choices and mentoring and coaching, governance, how we make decisions, and the rights and responsibilities of trustees and beneficiaries. Now let's look about what philanthropy does, how I use philanthropy in terms of building intellectual capital in a multi-generation family. First of all, career choices. I have worked with many, many families where the next generation found their career passion because of some philanthropic activity of the family. Sometimes they go into the nonprofit themselves. They actually develop a nonprofit, or they were exposed to areas that really led to some very interesting career choices because the family was very philanthropic and they were exposed. The situation of governance, which is probably critical as we're talking about moving from one generation to the other, really deals with how do we make decisions? How is each generation going to make decisions? And again, if we've been able to talk about how we're making decisions around philanthropy, we have built a model that can serve for expanding the governance when we're talking about other issues that the family has to deal with. Financial capital. Now you're probably saying, well, how am I building my philanthropy into financial capital? Well, I am very concerned with individuals being educated donors. Educated donors understand the financial need of the organizations that they support, and they read the information that the organizations give them about where the money is being spent and how the money is being used. So we use that as a training mechanism to talk to the next generation about budgeting. How are these organizations, for individuals who grew up in wealthy families, that term budgeting seems like some archaic expression from they don't know where, because they have never seen budgeting and they didn't talk about budgeting. Things just appeared. If you grow up in a poor family or you grow up in a more middle-class family, you certainly know about budgeting because there's a lot of conversation about the limitations of money. But that generally does not happen when a family is more affluent. So one of the things in terms of financial capital, when we're looking at the organizations that the family wants to support, let's look at what their budgets. And now, additionally, if there's a foundation, if the family has a foundation, I like very much for the next generation to be able to sit in on the investment committee because foundation funds are invested in a much more conservative way. And so we can start learning about investments through talking about the resources that the family has to invest in order to make the money to support their philanthropic goals. So again, I'm just showing you how I've been trying to tie the strategy of philanthropy into these other 4 critical capital areas, which are what I'm always talking about when I'm trying to talk about the creation of these multi-generation legacy families. And again, I will, in the Q&A, I'm happy to expand on any of this. Okay. And then finally, this is social capital, which every great family has. And this is all social capital. It could be a checkbook, a donor advised funds, a foundation, a support organization, an operating foundation, volunteer service. All of this is part of the philanthropic initiative of families. I just want to quickly give you, since I'm talking so much about legacy families, and I hope that you understand why I think that philanthropy has been a critical strategic tool that I use. But as I looked at these families, and I was very fortunate, my partner, who some of you may know, Doug Freeman, who built the law firm Freeman and Smiley. When Doug and I set about to write our book on legacy families, we looked at successful families, and we looked at families that had been successful multi-generationally. And we said, what is it that they have? And if we could identify those characteristics, then maybe we can do some kind of reverse engineering and say, here's what these families have. So let's see how they're working in your family, and let's see how we build them. So I'm just going to quickly tell you some of these characteristics. And again, you will see the role of philanthropy, shared values. These families have shared values, and what better way to be able to articulate what the values are than in your philanthropic activities. They're effective communicators. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more, because I think one of the situations, one of the challenges that is coming now in terms of philanthropy is that we have some communication problems between generations. And I will address that a little bit more in the Q&A. But there's no question that these families have learned how to communicate effectively. Because if there's anything that destroys relationships, it's not how you look, and it's not how you dress. It's what comes out of your mouth or does not come out of your mouth. And we all learn how to talk, but we don't learn how to communicate. And various families have different communication styles. So you think that you're doing fine in your little family with your 3 children, but then those 3 children are going to bring in 3 partners that came from a very different communication style. And so as we develop these multi-generation families, we've got a lot of activity going. And we have to kind of get it all organized in terms of patterns of effective communication. Again, I can build this around the philanthropic activities of the family. These families, they have a process for collaborative decision making and transparency about decisions affecting others. These families are very successful in conflict resolution. And again, sometimes this has been built around problems in making decisions on philanthropy. So I use that as how are we going to, what are the conflict resolution skills, and what are our code of conduct when we have conflict? It all comes around from something that may have occurred in that philanthropic activity. These families love diversity. And again, I think that in philanthropy, we are open to a tremendous amount of diversity. Now, the interesting thing about diversity, everybody intellectually, those of you who are in this audience say, oh yeah, we love diversity over there in that family, but not in my family. But families are going to be very diverse. And we need to learn to absolutely accept the diversity of families. And families that are very philanthropic really get much more exposed to diversity, which again is helping build that critical skill. They manage expectations. They have they have financial competency and an attitude of stewardship versus consumership. One of the things that I love about philanthropy in wealthy families is that the next generation cannot count their inheritance, because they have no idea that the family may not be donating the majority of their resources philanthropically. But whether they are doing that or not, it helps me talk about stewardship versus consumership. These families are very concerned about stewardship, and part of understanding stewardship is being able to marshal the resources so that they can meet the philanthropic goals that the family really hopes to be able to maintain. They're committed to lifelong learning. They, again, I said they are very charitable. They basically, this is very important. This diverse advisors who can collaborate and mentor. That is one of the great things that the Jewish Community Foundation can do. When you have the Jewish Community Foundation on your side philanthropically, you have that kind of diverse advisors who will collaborate and will mentor and will help you build the philanthropic model that will serve your family very well. So the foundation is a very, very good example of what I'm talking about when I talk about diverse advisors. These families celebrate heritage, tradition, and they've got lots of family stories. They express gratitude versus entitlement. And I think that when families are really exposed to philanthropy and they are aware of the world that has needs that are so great, then they understand how lucky they are. And I'm always sort of dealing with moving away from entitlement back into the field of gratitude as we move generationally from families where there's really a high profile of wealth. Time spent together in a positive manner. I mean, what's more exciting than when you're doing something philanthropically and the whole family gets together and works together and, you know, sees the benefit of what they can do. And finally, these families have fun and laughter. It's supposed to be fun, and philanthropy is supposed to be fun, and it can be a very enjoyable experience for everybody. So this is a final thought. How you leave your wealth is as much a reflection of who you are and as how you earned it, and likely to be remembered for a lot longer. And that's kind of my talking head. And now let's open the conversation to any specific questions that you may have in terms of how you want to utilize philanthropy within your own family.
Well, thank you, Lee. We've got a number of questions coming in as you're talking. I'll just start with a couple and then we'll see where it goes. There probably are other questions from other people as well. Lee, you mentioned the family members who were diametrically opposed. You used the tree hugger example. How do they ultimately find a middle ground for collaboration? And
Well,
another,
in this particular situation,
Mhm.
we found some areas that they wanted to give to some very specific organizations that were trying to stop what the major family business was doing. So needless to say, the senior generation was enraged. That's putting it mildly. What we were able to do is say, look, you're interested in the environment, let's see if we can find some other areas where you can support the environment, with the understanding that the specific organization that they were very interested in creates a tremendous amount of problems in the family. And they were able to see that eventually because we gave them some other options of being able to satisfy their need to support the environment without actually going head on with the senior generation. It took some work.
Lee, there's a couple of questions about finding common ground on issues related to Israel and Gaza, and how do we handle our current polarized political situations when it breaks out in a family?
I'm going to say one thing that you cannot do. Well, you can do it, but you're going to really astray. You cannot get angry at the next generation when they start to express some concerns about what Israel is doing. What you have to be able to do is say, let's have a conversation. I have friends who are completely estranged from their kids because their kids were somewhat sympathetic to what was happening and somewhat critical of Israel, and the parents went ballistic. This is not at all how you are going to get any kind of cooperation philanthropically or any kind of understanding of the position that Israel was in. And I think what you have to do, I think part of the next generation's attitude about the anti-Israel supporting of the individuals of Gaza is really lack of information. They don't quite have the entire picture. And I think that maybe what the family needs to do is use an outside person to kind of bring in some information, but it's got to be a dialogue. It can't get heated, and it can't get, how dare you even think this way, you're Jewish, and that kind of rhetoric is causing enormous estrangement.
I'll make a plug. There are organizations in the Jewish community that help facilitate difficult conversations about Israel in particular. And so there are resources to help with those specific difficult communication challenges. We have another question about how do you address a situation where your adult children believe that because their donations are small, that it's not even worth giving to the nonprofits, because those nonprofits only care about the larger donations, and they're not going to be the priority because they're too small a fish.
I think that the way that, and I'm sure you can help them at the foundation, is to go to some of these smaller grassroots organizations where the smallest kind of contribution makes a tremendous difference. I think that part of what you do as a family, and again, you've got the resources of the Jewish Community Foundation, to find some small grassroots organizations that desperately need whatever kind of contribution you can make, so that the individuals can feel that whatever they do, it has meaningful impact.
And another question: how do you mediate disagreements between members of the family about where to give?
Well, now, in terms of the giving, I think that I kind of structured something. I think I would love the family to be able to sit down as a family and talk about how we want to do giving. All right. I think if you want your kids involved, the reason your next generation very often will not get involved with the philanthropy of the family, and this is true when I've worked with some major personal family foundations, is that they say, I don't want to go because all I'm doing is rubber stamping what my mom and dad want, and no one listens to what I want. Okay. So if you want the family to be involved and to be able to contribute as a family, then you've got to let them have some voice, and you've got to be able to go along with some of the things that are critically important to them. I think one of the things when we have the donor advised fund and everybody in the family can't participate is that the family, prior to coming to the donor advised meeting at the foundation, sits down as a family and says, here's our allocation. This is how much we are allocating to philanthropy. Let's talk about how we want to give it, so that when the family members that are part of the board of the donor advised fund come, they are bringing information that came from the family, and the entire family felt that they were making a contribution. You've got to listen, and you've got to let people, if they're going to put the time in, you've got to respect the fact that they may have some very personal kinds of things that they want to support.
We worked with a family recently who a beautiful family where they gave a portion of their annual giving. A percentage was given to each member of the family, and they had some broad giving guidelines. So there was the red lines of, because of this is your grandma and grandpa, these are their red lines, these are their values. Knowing that, go ahead and spend your percentage of the greater pot. So that was an interesting way, I thought, to say, okay, there are certain things that we can't budge on, but other things that we can.
But usually those guidelines are pretty broad.
Yeah.
I mean, when you really look at it, like when I told you about that family where there was such conflict with, environmental issues, there were enough other environmental activities that we could let them participate. So that they would feel that we respected the fact that they were so passionate about environmental causes. We didn't just totally dismiss it, but we had to shift exactly where it was going to go. And I think that's really important. I think what you really want to do is be a philanthropic family. And so the value, it's not a specific thing about where we're giving, but it's about the entire values. The value that we give, and we are generous, and we care about the world. That's the value. That's the value component. Where the actual dollars are going to go is kind of another situation. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Interesting enough, because I know this has come up a lot about the Israel situation. When I have been confronted with that from the next year, I say to them, how would you handle this? How would you handle it if somebody came into your family and took away your part of your family members and held them hostage? What would you do? It's an interesting kind of way to let them think about what the situation is.
Lee, could you offer some examples of effective family philanthropy governance structures that can promote collaboration and decision-making?
What, governance really refers to how we are making decisions. And each generation has to really figure that out. It's a generational kind of a thing. Mom and dad are going to make decisions one way, and the next generation has to figure out how to make decisions. I think one of the things about speaking as a family about where our philanthropic goals are is that you can create a certain, you can create, it's not really governance, because unless you have a family foundation, if you have a family foundation and we're going to have a board, now we have a more structured governance situation, because who's going to go on the board? Who gets to represent the family branches on the board? And how are we going to rotate that? And how are we going to, within a family, decide who represents the family on the board? And how do we create a junior board to train the next generation in terms of the governance structure of the family? This occurs when you've got a large family and you've got a structure like a foundation. When we're talking about a donor advised fund, we're not really talking so much about governance. We're talking much more about collaborative decision making. Or when we're talking about a family that doesn't even have a donor advised fund, but just says, you know what, I'm going to sit down with my family and here's what we usually give. Here is our giving budget for the year. Family, let's talk about what we want to do. And the idea of this is that no one is taking the lead and saying this is how we have to do it. What it is let's everyone talk about what's really important. Let's allocate a portion of whatever we're going to give to each family member, and then let's have some collective grant making. Let's have some things that represent the legacy of the family. And if we're doing this out within a family, let's just say we don't have the advantage of either a foundation or working with the Jewish Community Foundation, but you're just talking in your family, okay, about what is important. You may say, this year, let's pick an area that we want to make our collaborative grant making. Whatever the area is. Underprivileged children, the wars, the environment, whatever it is. And then within that range, we will make a collaborative grant making process, and everybody can, and then we will give each individual a right to make individual. And part of what we do in the meetings is everyone shares what they did so that they can share their passion. And now people can start to understand where other family members are coming and maybe even enjoin them. I mean, I've had families when we're doing this, where did you give your $1,500 that we allocated? And they said, I gave it to XYZ. A cousin said, oh, you know what? That really sounds interesting. I would give with you next year. And now suddenly we've got two cousins who came together and said, let's do this together. And then another cousin may say, if the three of us do it, we can really kind of make a difference for the organization. That's the beauty and the joy of when this family is coming together in a family meeting on the topic of philanthropy. Because philanthropy is probably one of the lesser controversial topics, unless we're into this Israel-Hamas situation. But let's remove that, which is so controversial. And generally speaking, we're doing good. We're making the world a better place. I mean, who doesn't want to do that?
We have a couple of questions about generational differences and power imbalances. So
Okay.
A question about what generational differences you see between, boomers and Gen Z, and, when they get in a room together, what are the patterns that emerge? And sort of connected to that, what power imbalances emerge? Because likely the boomer is the wealth creator, or perhaps the generation above is the wealth creator. The Gen Z doesn't have as much influence. So what are those patterns, and how does that imbalance work?
Well, the pattern is exactly what you said. But if in fact we want to engage the family, if we want to, when I'm talking about let's use our philanthropy strategically, then the person who's got the money can't be making all the rules. They're just going to have to give it up if they really want to be a philanthropic family and they want to use philanthropy as a mechanism of building this family together and using it in all the ways that I just told you about it when I did my initial presentation. We can't have somebody saying, but it's my money, and so we're going to do it my way. If we do that, then we're not going to have philanthropy binding this family together. So at that particular point, the person, it's like the father or the mother who runs a big corporation. And when they come into the family, they're not the boss. They're a member of the family. And if they start bossing around everyone in the family like they boss everyone around in the company, then we got a problem. We have a problem. We can't really have, successful collaboration. So in the area of philanthropy, there's no question. Everybody knows who made the money. It's not a secret. But if the person who made the money says, therefore, I get to make all the decisions, you're ruining the opportunity to use philanthropy in a much more productive manner. Now, in terms of the difference in giving, certainly there's a difference in giving. I mean, senior generations were much more likely to support existing institutions. Younger generations are much more interested in the earth and, the environment, more hands-on type of things, much less inclined to give to structured organizations. This has sometimes been a problem. It's certainly been a problem within the Jewish community where the senior generation, for many, many families of wealth, the majority of the highest percentage of their giving was to Jewish causes. And now the next generation kind of moves away from that. And that's created, so we've got to do some things to capture things that may have a Jewish basis that have the interest of that generation, if in fact we'd still want to try to keep, a primary basis of giving to Jewish causes. Now you've got the situation of intermarriage. And when you have intermarriage, now we've got more of a dilution. You just can't say all our philanthropy's got to be Jewish. I mean, if you want participation of the family, you can certainly say that if you made the money and that's where you want to give it. But if you want philanthropy to be this binding factor in the family, then we've got to just not take that definitive stance. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think of the Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
Lee, could you address the question about the role that family storytelling and traditions play in preserving a family's philanthropic legacy and inspiring future generations to carry it forward?
I love stories. I love storytelling. And I'll tell you what, I love documenting the stories with a video camera because the next generation is very visual. They're not reading books. They're looking visually. And so when you've got the senior generation that's been really philanthropic, I love to capture that on a video interview so that generations can see why grandma and grandpa were so interested in whatever they were interested in and how they gave when they couldn't really even afford it, and the pleasures and the joy that they've had from certain of their philanthropic activities. I want that captured, and it's so easy. You can stand with your camera now, these wonderful cameras, you can take a video that we can use for future generations to really understand where that history came from. And it's been very, very effective and very easy to do. So if anybody, if you've got the senior generation, capture them talking about why this is important, what it meant to them. That's how we pass on that legacy.
I love that, Lee, especially, we often recommend to the donors we work with to write a letter to the next generation, tell them about your stories, tell them about your values, what you envision, and a video. I mean, that's even better.
The video is far more powerful than the writing. And I remember years ago when I was first coming into this, I was running a family meeting for a very prominent family in the South. And this was the first time the family office had put together this big family meeting. The patriarch and the matriarch had passed away, but they had been hugely prominent in the community and very philanthropic. So there was a lot of professional footage that had been done by the media when they were donating. And so the family office had collected all of that. And at this first family meeting, they had put it all together. They showed this big thing about various activities that the grandparents had done. The next generation was just mesmerized, as was I. I felt like I knew these people who I'd never met. I saw them. I saw at one particular point, the wife was sitting on the stage while the husband was being honored. And then when he got up, he walked over and he so gently, she looked up and she smiled at him and he so gently took her arm to help her off the stage. It was just amazing. Now you can't get that in a letter. Okay, you visually get it. And we have a generation that is absolutely visually geared.
Yes. We, by the way, for all the people who are in the audience here, we at the foundation have created something called our Legacy Letter booklet, where we ask a series of questions that you can write, kind of where you learned about philanthropy, when you first visited Israel, etc. And it's a great companion to a will or a trust to talk about kind of where you come from. And that structure actually could then lead to a family member videotaping. Instead of it being in writing, it could be in voice.
Yeah, you know what? It is so easy for someone to take those questions that you have put together and have someone else with a video. I mean, I have families that really set up these, major things, and they have a videographer, that same videographer that you use for the bar and bat mitzvahs and the weddings. They come in and a family member is directing the questions, or we've had some wonderful situations where we've had the younger generation. We have the senior generation being videoed and the younger generation is asking the questions. And it's being captured by video. I am a huge fan in doing it video because I just think that that's going to be the most common method of educating and passing on traditions going forward, because this is a very visual kind of next gen.
I love that. There's an interesting question here. Do you ever think it makes sense or advise families to break up a family foundation, especially, as a family gets more and more extended and bigger? Are there reasons why you would say, let's not do this together?
Yes, there have been times where we have had to break up a foundation, and that's basically because there was tremendous dysfunction among the next generation. There was hostility and there was anger, and foundation meetings became very, very unpleasant, and we did divide the foundation. Now, what a lot of families are doing, if there is a major family foundation, individual members, as the family grows larger, let's say that we have a family foundation and there's a board, and let's say only 6 members can be on the board. And so you've got these 6 branches, or however you decide who can be on the board, but it's limited. So these families now say, okay, there's a bigger foundation, but we want our little family to be able to participate in the whole act of giving through a foundation. And they create smaller foundations. They may come to the Jewish Community Foundation and create a donor advised fund, even though there's a big family foundation, so that their individual family members can all participate where they couldn't participate in the bigger foundation, like the Ford Foundation. There's not a member of the Ford Found that's involved in that foundation. Rockefellers are a very good example. The Rockefellers kept doing their own foundations. There was a big foundation, but then family members would make their own foundations. I think that's really what happens. But if the foundation is turning into an unpleasant activity, then it's not serving its purpose. And sometimes we do have to break it up and divide it.
Yeah.
This gets to, let me just do a little kind of a sidebar. This really relates to estate planning also. And I am always very much aware, parents would love to think that the fact that their kids are going to go kumbaya-ing into the future when the kids have not been getting along. Okay. And so they tie them together in the estate plan, which turns into being a disaster. If you know that for whatever reason, your kids have not been able to get together, have not gotten along well, have not collaborated, don't tie them together in joint assets in the estate plan. It just creates a tremendous amount of problems. Divide it. divided, and recognize the fact that they will not. It may break your heart, but it's not going to work. I remember years ago, one of the daughters, a family I was working with, the son was a very significant drug addict, and there was a lot of money. And the daughter came to me and said, I want you to know the family was an Italian family, and this father thought everyone was going to be on the Kumbaya trail. And she said, listen, I want you to say to my dad, I don't care how he divides this estate. I am not going to be a partner with my brother. I love him. I will take care of him. Do not put me with this liability. And she was right. And the father eventually did divide the estate so that everyone had their own piece of it. And it's sometimes heartbreaking, but I think parents are sometimes unrealistic about the fact that can their kids collaborate and can they jointly work together? And I think you have to be honest. If not, you just create a mess in terms of what's going to be going on in the future.
Lee, do you have advice for someone who is part of the next gen of a legacy family who'd like to see their family better uphold the pillars to a successful legacy family that you described?
I think that, you're doing this transcript and I've really given you the basics. I kind of try to summarize very quickly the basics. I think if there's someone in the next generation that really is interested in this, take the video and talk to the senior generation about it. Say, I just saw this video. This is what we really would love to do. I would love to think that our family could go on and be connected and have a good time generationally. Here are some of the things that I learned about that might be important. What are we doing? And if we're not doing this, how do we learn to do it? And you get the education. You go out and you find the resources that will help you build that skill set that I said that is so absolutely critical. This is not rocket scientistry, people. It's really pretty basic stuff. You just have to figure out what it is that you want to do and how you're going to get there and use the resources. We're lucky in Los Angeles. We have so much resources to help you, and so if this is where you want to go, and I got to tell you, there's nothing more satisfying than when a family gets together and they all are having a good time. I come from a family where we're not tied together at all in business, but we started doing, my brother-in-law started taking his family on a cruise at Christmas, and then he asked our family to join. Last Christmas, 71 family members went on this cruise. And they've never had one problem. And everyone has a good time. And again, this is not a family that's tied together. And this is a family that's tied together by values. They care about one another. They enjoy being together. We are planning this now every other year. I don't know what's going to happen. 71 was a lot to organize last Christmas, but it's possible to do that.
It all seems so simple until emotions, get involved, and it adds a bit of challenge to what, as you said, should be simple and fun.
But particularly, let me tell you, families, in terms of your philanthropy, our Jewish Community Foundation is an extraordinary resource for you.
Thank you. That is a great plug, and really, we are here to help. So we really use us because we want to help with meaningful philanthropy strategies. We want to help with impactful giving. So as much as you can want to use us, we're here for you. I think that we're gonna have one last question before we wrap up. 3 easy ways a multi-generational family can communicate, can really move forward in making impact.
Are you asking me that question?
Yes.
3 easy ways. You know what? I cannot tell you 3 easy ways. I can tell you that probably the most important skill that a family needs to learn to be able to do is to communicate. And if you're not communicating, if you do not communicate effectively, then that's where you go out and get a resource to teach you how to communicate. There's no 3 easy lessons, because you very often you got to learn it. There are certain kind of skills that help communication, and you have to understand what's blocking the communication. I'm not talking about everyone having to go into therapy, but I do think that there are resources that come in and can help you learn how to communicate. The roadblocks to communication, if you understand what they are, but it's not 3 easy, it's not A, B, and C. You know, I can say listening is a critical skill, right? No one's going to argue with me that listening is not a critical skill, but I'm not telling, that doesn't mean that you know how to listen effectively, reflectively, without interrupting, without giving it advice. How do you listen in a way that's supportive? And this is a process. This isn't a 1-sentence answer that I can give you. You can read books. There's a lot of good books on successful communication and blocks to communication. There are resources out there, but that is in the area. I think that probably I work more on communication with families than probably any other single skill. And every family that I've ever worked with really has to sit for a whole day of a communication workshop. And that's how important I think communication is and how complicated it can be. So I'd love to be able to say A, B, and C, but that would do a tremendous injustice to the complicated process of communication.
Any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
No, I think these questions are great. I'm so happy that, you know, you're listening and you're attending and you're really concerned with philanthropy. And I just hope I gave you some other insights and ways to look at it and why I have felt that it's my critical strategic tool, very frankly.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Lee, for joining us tonight, for sharing your wisdom. I mean, it's the best of the best. You are the best of the best, and we are all privileged to get to learn from you tonight, and to be partners with you in this journey. Thank you all for attending. Again, if you have a fund with us, you have the benefit of philanthropic advising from the Jewish Community Foundation. So please feel free to reach out. We are here for you, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.
I would just also add that we have many books that we can either lend you, give you, suggest to you. We have reading lists. We have millions of articles. We have tools to promote intergenerational conversations. And the foundation, actually, we've got a number of trained people with skills that could really help every family based on in a customized way. And so use us as your ally and your partner, if you will. We're eager to be helpful to you. And on that note, I want to thank you, Lee. You are really a great teacher, and we're blessed to have you in our wheelhouse, as they say.
Man, it's always been a pleasure. It is really, I think the work that you do is so terrific. And I loved my opportunity to serve on the board, and so I cannot say enough positive things about what the foundation can do.
Thank you.
Individual families and for this community.
Thank you. And to all of you who are on the listening side, please be in touch with us. You know, we're eager to be supportive and be there for you. But we need you to tell us to start the conversation. We use this forum as a way of hopefully tickling your mind a little bit to think of ways that you could expand your knowledge base. And we're just thrilled to be here and grateful for the opportunity to learn from Lee. So in conclusion, thank you one and all, and really happy to share this evening with you. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.